Welcome to our July 2022 Learning Seminar, and our topic today is reviewing the new volunteer manual. So hopefully you all saw my email earlier. It was supposed to be physically in your hands before today. Unfortunately, that's not how it panned out. I did get confirmation that they are going in the mail today. So you should have the physical copies soon. That being said, we will go through this with the virtual version, and I'll share my screen so we can reference that. But before we dive into the manual, I want to just touch base on an email I sent out on Friday. We are going through a process with the MHAND HR department right now, just looking through the policies and the things that are going on, and making sure that, you know, everyone is on the same page. And so one of the activities that we are pausing for now, so the HR department can look into it, is transporting participants. So you should have gotten an email from me on Friday indicating that any activities where you physically transport your participant in your car need to go on pause for now. They should not be happening while MHAND looks into the policies and procedures that need to be in place to make sure that everyone's protected while that goes on. Okay, so our goal is to find a way where they can resume. I know, I'm sorry, Charlie, I feel that way too. Our goal is to find a way where that can resume, because we totally understand how important that is to a lot of your connections and the things that you do. So our goal is to figure out how we can get them to continue, but we need a bit of time in order to do that. So for now, please no transporting participants. If you're able to meet them in a location, you can still like do things out in the community together. You just can't be the one to physically drive them. Another option is Uber or GoGo Grandparent to kind of purchase rides to places. And like I said, we're working on a formal policy to give you a bit more direction. We just can't have folks driving in their cars for now. Okay. So our HR department is drawing up a just short form saying what I just said, and they'll send it out in the next couple days to everyone, just asking that you sign it real quick, acknowledging it, and they'll put it in the files. So I just want to give everyone a heads up that that's coming up. All right. So let me open up my manual here. And I want to invite folks to pull out those questions. Let's start with the questions that you have written down. So we want to make sure we get through those. And then we'll spend the rest of the time together going through the manual and its sections. But I want to open with questions. Eileen?
The manual referenced our having received a form that told us about emergency contact information for our connection. I don't ever remember receiving any such information about my connection.
You did not?
No.
Yes, no, you did not receive that. That is a new procedure that is going into place, and we are going to implement that moving forward.
Okay, I thought maybe
so
I
one of
it somewhere. So okay.
Yeah, nope. That is something new. So yes, so moving forward, you know, we included it so you all are familiar with what the new procedure is going to be. That will include that form. And that will be part of our outreach in hopefully the next month with the participants, is filling out that form and getting that on the books for everyone. And once I have it for your participant, I will share a copy with you that you can tuck into that binder so you have it handy.
Thank you.
Hey, Casey, this is Mary. On those emergency procedures, I noticed that it said, if you call 911 for somebody, you hang, then you call the participant, you say, I've called for help. and then you hang up and you call them like back in like 15 minutes. And I was just wondering, if we can, shouldn't we just stay on the line with the participant until the emergency, like the 911, the police or whoever get there?
That was my first inclination too, Mary, but the direction that I received was actually to clear their phone line. We don't want to be
Okay.
holding their phone line up.
I
So
get
that's
you.
where the direction to call,
Okay.
let them know what's going on, and then back away comes from.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Great
If
question.
if we're on the line with them, does that mean that 911 can't get through? Is that what you mean?
Potentially, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
Any other questions?
Casey, this is Laura. I noticed something about training for participants, that it was 5 hours, 5 hours, 5 hours, not participants, volunteers. Did I read that correctly? It was almost like a little pamphlet that was with and then 46 hours for some other type of
Yes, so Laura, what you are referring to is the Certified Peer Recovery Specialist portion of the manual. And we can actually, let me share my screen, we'll jump forward to there. So,
beginning of things, so.
yep,
Yeah,
so let's jump there. So this section is informational for you. This Certified Peer Recovery Specialist internship is not what you all are doing. You all are typical volunteers. This internship is an opportunity that is open to all of you if you choose to pursue the CPRS certification. Our program can serve as an internship for that. But that additional training that you mentioned in this brochure,
Right.
that is not required of you in your volunteer role. That's only something you would do if you were an active intern. Does that help?
Yeah. I found it very interesting, looking through the material, that actually one of the selection criteria for a volunteer is it would be desirable if they themselves had some mental health issue in their background, so that they could more understand maybe what their participant was going through. Did I read that right? Read that right? Yeah.
Yes. And that really aligns with, what we've been talking about all along, that idea of, you hear your participants experiencing something, and if you're able to really validate that by sharing your own experience back, that goes a really long way. So that was not a requirement when you all joined, right? We did not have that written in. It was more of an optional kind of thing. We are moving in the direction of new volunteers. We're asking to have that experience. Now, that being said, I want to acknowledge that there are some things in here that are new moves like that, right? They weren't things that were required when we started this, but we are moving in that direction. So if you do not personally identify as someone with lived experience, I'm not going to ask you to leave by any means. That's not what's going on here. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Well, I could have sworn that was a question, actually,
It was. Yep.
It was. Yeah. Okay.
I just didn't. If you said no, I didn't say you couldn't volunteer. Yeah. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you're differentiating. I mean, the certified peer recovery specialist is a very specific role.
Yes.
My understanding of the peer thing and all this was that it would be, mental health experience and or addiction and or whatever. And I wasn't even clear if that was a requirement or not. I knew we were asked that, but I'm not totally clear that the peer means we've had experience ourselves with mental health or mental illness or substance abuse.
Yes. So short answer, Lois, yes,
Mhm.
that is what peer means.
Okay.
Long answer, I did ask you that question when you signed up.
Yep.
And if you answered no, that did not exclude you from being able to volunteer.
Okay.
For
But it
new
will-
volunteers, if they answer that no, you know, that will be an exclusionary criteria.
Mhm.
Any other questions? You guys are on it.
Yeah, it was either you or if I'm remembering you or someone you were involved with, let's say for instance, a family member. It didn't necessarily have to be you, but you had to have some experience in some fashion. Whether it was your experience or whether or not you were party to someone else's experience.
Yes.
Is that
So
still true?
Yes, the line is have lived experience with a mental health condition, either personally or through a loved one.
Right.
So yes, both of those are still true. And Lois, by mental health condition, that includes addiction. I was just advised to simplify the language.
I actually thought the rule was really good, Casey. I did. I mean, what
That means so much.
I've only read what we were assigned to read for today because that's what I had the time to do. But I honestly think it was well done.
Thanks, Laura. And I will point out for everyone's understanding that the page numbers are one page off. I didn't notice that until earlier today. I will ask our communications team to fix that and then send you all a new link with the
Well,
fixed version.
I sure didn't.
Any other questions? I'll just mention in the vein of the internship that we do have one active intern right now. That's Mark with a C. And if you recall, we used to refer to that as the step up connection, where he gives additional support to your people. So that's still part of his role, but we've simplified it. That's just part of his internship role now. So if the internship is something you're interested in learning more about, if you'd like to learn more about the certification, Mark is actively pursuing that at this time. And I'm sure he'd be more than happy to talk to anyone about his experience and what it entails. And I would be too.
Was this the Mark that was involved kind of early on as a peer volunteer and was a social worker, or somebody else? Different Mark.
We had two Marks and neither of them are ringing that bell for me, Lois.
Okay, all right.
Sorry.
Okay.
All right. Well, if there aren't any other questions that you all have brought, then let's go through just section by section. And if anything bubbles up as we go through, please feel free to unmute and jump in. We're a small group, so we can handle that. So just so you know, in the virtual version, the table of contents is click through. So you can actually click on any of these kind of sections here, and it jumps you to it. That's the part that I said is one page off. So right now it's one page off. You have to scroll down about a page in order to get to the section that you clicked on. But that is a feature in the virtual version that we wanted to make easy for you. So you all are well steeped in what the Connections Project is and what it does. I wanted to include some of the kind of recent statistics around mental health and aging to help ground us in our work and to why it is so important at this time. You know, the number of aging Marylanders is growing exponentially, particularly in Baltimore County. And a new report finds that 1 in 4 adults over age 65 reported anxiety or depression most weeks since the onset of the pandemic. And that is a large increase. It used to be 1 in 10 before the pandemic. After the pandemic, it's 1 in 4. And so that is research that I believe was grounded in 2020. But, you know, by all standards, we're seeing a projection that that's just set to continue as we continue through this pandemic. So that makes our work more important than ever. I want to highlight that, you know, a lot of our conversations in supervision are grounded in talking about how our participants are doing. You may share some of the symptoms that they're experiencing, some of the things they're struggling with. And one of the roles that we keep going back to as volunteers is supporting our folks and helping them to manage their symptoms. And I want to highlight that that's important because research indicates that by reducing symptoms of depression and anxiety and misuse of any medications or alcohol, older adults are often able to better address other problems going on in their lives, which I know many of our connections have lots of kind of piled up situational struggles and things like that. So by reducing the symptoms of anxiety and depression, they're able to better deal with the other things that are challenging. And so that's where we come in to kind of start with that emotional support. And we offer resources along the way, right, to help with problem solving, but that emotional support really remains the crux of what we do for that important reason. Does that make sense to everyone? Wonderful. All right, so we can skip through that. You all brought up some of the changes in the volunteer recruitment criteria. And I want to highlight number 4 here. Volunteers are able to meet the responsibilities outlined in the volunteer job description, including time commitments and regular access to phone and internet-based technology such as email and Zoom. So that is a change. When the project first started, I really wanted to try to make it accessible to people who didn't have computers. And over the past couple years, that has unfortunately just proved too difficult. So we need to choose our modality of communication and stick to it. And so the decision was made that we are, let me scroll to this section. All right. So volunteers need to have regular access to internet-based technology such as email and Zoom. Regular access to a phone service, and the alternate phone number is available through Google Voice, as you all know. Volunteers need to be able to navigate online forums and resource lists, or have the flexibility to learn how. As you all know, I'm very open to teaching. But those are going to be important communication standards that we're leaning into. So as you see, an example is when we started the project, I asked you, what communication do you prefer, phone calls or email? And it was a bit unrealistic of me to expect that I was going to call 30 people who preferred phone calls every time I wanted to send out an email. That was a little ambitious. So we're choosing email. So it's very important in your role as a volunteer that you monitor your email for communications, that you read the monthly digest email for program updates, that you communicate, or rather that you participate in our 4 continuing education seminars a year. And if you're unable to attend a scheduled seminar, review the recording in a timely manner.
Casey, can I
And
interrupt?
yes.
One of the things on your list that I have fallen down on is having a Google phone number. I got one initially, but my participant would have a hard time accessing me through the Google phone number. And I called them a couple times on my regular phone number. So that's what we use all the time. And since I didn't use it enough, it reverted, it went back. Is that a hard
Yes.
use the Google phone number?
No, it's so the Google phone number is a boundary setting suggestion. It's not a requirement. And Eileen, you're not the only volunteer who uses their personal phone number. So yeah, great question.
Sorry, interrupted.
Great question. So yes, emails are our official way of communicating. So we need our volunteers to really check their emails for things from us. Virtual surveys are going to be a primary way that we collect data. I think you've all seen us starting to lean into that. So whenever I send out a survey, please take a moment to complete it. Everything that you submit is really helpful in helping me plan for the future activities and things. And English language is our way of communicating with volunteers, written and verbally. So those are some kind of immovable objects that we need all volunteers to be able to participate in and keep up with. And with that being said, hard copies and mailed versions of any communications are definitely available. So if I send an email out and you don't have a printer and you're like, you know what, I really want a copy of this in my binder that you're all going to receive, let me know. And I am more than happy to print it out at my office, put it in an envelope and send it to you so you can put it in your book. So any requests for hard copy things, whether it's a form, whether it's anything like that, are perfectly fine. Just let me know, okay? Any thoughts, questions on any of that?
Do you think the requirements are going to keep, the mandatory requirements are going to keep increasing as the program gets more entrenched and more whatever? I mean, I don't mind. I go to the 4 meetings a year. For a while, it was the educational things every month, and to this, and to the surveys, and to the monthly things. But I'm just kind of curious about its direction.
Sure. So it is not.
It's not as fun.
It's not as fun when yeah.
It's not as fun.
I agree. Yeah, no, paperwork stinks. It is not my personal goal to give you all more paperwork, I promise. That being said, there will be a bit of paperwork this year as we redo things. We're at a point with this project where it's been going for almost 3 years now, and that's amazing. That's really exciting. We've learned a ton, and there's some I's we need to dot and T's we need to cross and get things on paper, and the organization needs that too. So this manual was my first go at that, to just get it into your hands. You all remember when you started that you signed some onboarding paperwork? Okay, so technically I should have had you resubmit that every year. That was a mistake on my part, that I did not ask you to do that. So instead of sending it out to you now saying resubmit it, we're actually going through it to make sure that it's right, so I don't have to ask you to submit it twice. Yep. And so we're going through that. That should be done in probably, my goal is the next 2 months. And once that's done, I'll send that out to all of you. It'll be a paperwork dump like when you started. There were a couple forms for you to review and sign. I don't think it'll be too many, maybe 4 forms. And then the goal is that you're done for the year when that happens. Barring any, if we make a new COVID policy, right? If things change and that has to go out, or if we have something bubble up like this transportation thing, those are kind of unforeseen, like, oh, dang, we need to get this on file. But beyond that, my goal is that the only paperwork you really need to submit is that once a year, review these forms and renew your interest as a volunteer, basically. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Mhm. Yeah. And in terms of, surveys or things like that, you can expect an annual experience survey like you received this year. Otherwise, that's the only one I really have planned. If, as Charlie and I plan this outdoor event, if we want to invite people to give some feedback on what you'd like to see, if you're planning to go or things like that, we might send out a quick survey. But, those are optional and only if you're planning to attend whatever we're planning. So.
And the COVID policies, change from time to time as COVID has changed. Is that, I know we sent something signed back recently, the
Yes.
4 or 5 pieces of paper we get, whenever we get that, is that also COVID or is that now handled?
So the COVID policy is done.
Whatever it was we signed, yeah.
Yep, that's the most recent thing you signed. There's actually a copy of that in the hard binder that you're going to receive. So that's on file. That's our policy. Barring, another pandemic U-turn, that's what it's going to be for the foreseeable future.
Okay.
Great questions. Great questions. All right, you all know that supervision is required as part of your volunteer role. And you all are well steeped in the maintaining consistent contact with participants, let them know if you need to cancel your call, things like that. Lois, the maintain record section is related to your question, reviewing and submitting the volunteer agreement yearly and communicating any changes. If you move, just let me know that you changed your address. If you get a new phone number, email, things like that, just so we can keep communicating. Very practical. All right. Part of your onboarding paperwork was a confidentiality form. There's a copy of that in the back. And generally communicating any concerns you have. And this is a moot point for now since transportation is paused, but transportation costs are covered by the volunteer in the existing standard, which is paused. So kind of put an X through that. There's no travel requirement for your role. And then we spelled out some of the things that you gain as a volunteer.
Casey, the driving limitations are really going to affect our relationship, okay? And how long is that going to be? Do you have any idea? I mean,
I wish I did, Charlie. Unfortunately, this is not up to me.
But we can visit their house, right?
Yes, you can drive yourself to them. They just
Right.
cannot get in your car and you drive them somewhere.
Well, if I bring 2 bicycles, we can ride our bike down then.
Sure, I don't see
I
anything
wish.
wrong with that.
Casey, I guess that's the liability issue. Because I
It
remember
is.
talked about that way back when I was the new volunteer. And I guess it's a liability issue for the county if something happens to the participant.
Yes, and that's really what's at the crux of it, is protecting the participant, protecting you as a volunteer. God forbid you get in an accident,
Right.
and maybe the participant tries to sue you or sue us, right? So just the organization needs to get something on paper that everyone's comfortable with, and that's what they're working on. And that'll be the new direction that comes out.
For instance, there will be a requirement that if you drive someone that you have insurance.
That may be part of it.
That
may be part of it.
has to be part of it.
It's still up in the air as to exactly what it will include. The organization's looking at a couple different options at this time. So I'll let you all know what they settle on.
I think that your regular, I mean, I would have to check to be absolutely sure, but I think your regular insurance would cover someone else in the car. In other words, you are covered for that. But I mean, if I were the county, I'd be worried about it because the participants turn around and sue the county.
Yeah, It is covered, but the county has its own, things they have to deal with, as does any, governmental institution. They just have to deal with it.
Yeah, there's a lot of people involved, and I get the trickle down. So this is not my decision.
Yeah.
But I am advocating for, what I've seen all of you doing, and I really see how important being able to go places together is to you and your connections. So I'm really working to advocate for that, and a solution that includes that as they go through this process. So please know that.
Well, it's funny. I just spoke to my connection about that because I had just taken her to lunch, and I told her I couldn't drive her anymore. Said, "Oh, that's okay. I'll make lunch next time. You can come to my apartment." So, but she's all for meeting me somewhere using the oh gosh, what's the name of that program where she gets she pays for a ticket. As a matter of fact, you sent her some around Christmas.
Mobility, yes.
You're right, mobility, right. So she doesn't really care, but I do. I'm guilty when she's taking mobility. I have to do is hop in my car.
Yeah, I feel you, Laura. And
Just explain
encouraging.
Tell them it's the county. It's not you, which is true.
Yeah, it's a program policy. Feel free to point at that.
Right. Oh no, I did those. Jump at every advantage. Don't look like the bad guy.
Right.
Oh, we all remember our conversations about boundaries early on, right? And sometimes when we need to draw a boundary, it's easy to feel like the bad guy, especially if it's a boundary that you perhaps wouldn't draw for yourself. It's one that you have to do. So I emphasize with that. And it is a boundary at this time that we need to respect. Any questions, comments on the volunteer job description? These are items that all volunteers, new and old, are going to be held to as an expectation of your volunteer role. So I just want to make sure everyone is understanding of that. Okay. So we'll move on to the next section then. Thank you to everyone who provided feedback on what you wanted to see and what would be useful for you to have in this volunteer handbook. Self-care was one of those topics that you requested. And so this section is a write-up on a summary of the boundaries conversation that we have it when you start, reminding us what kind of boundary making tools we have available to us. So the Google Voice number is recommended. Video calls are a tool, but we suggest that you don't use FaceTime since that's tied to your personal number. That being said, if you're using your personal number, evidently that's not an issue, but that's a possible boundary. We had a question about email come up. So volunteers are welcome to email participants if both parties are open to that, and they can use their personal email address if that's what they would like to do. If you would like to email your participant, but you don't want to use your personal email address, I'm happy to help you create a new email address in order to communicate with your participant if that's what you would prefer. We talked about the idea of creating a schedule and sticking to it. You are all well aware of that recommendation. And clearly communicating expectations, right? If you only have an hour to talk, making that very clear, reminding them as you get towards the last 15 minutes, things like that. So these are all tenets that have been present in our conversations during supervision over the past 2 years, but they're written down for you here as you requested. Okay, I also have written out here. Yes.
I just had one comment about that. for me to, or at least for me and my participant, to have an absolute schedule is difficult because she has so many doctor's appointments.
Okay.
But what I've typically done is schedule the next discussion before I get off the phone with her. But it's
Perfect.
not always every Monday at 11 o'clock. It's just not that easy necessarily to do that because of her health.
That is a perfect solution, Laura. So you're
Okay.
setting the expectation as to when the next call will be. That's wonderful. Great problem solving.
Okay, well, so in other words, you're comfortable with that?
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay. All right.
Certainly. The crux of that recommendation is just the idea of making it clear what the boundaries are in your relationships. And I acknowledge that that's different with different volunteers. Ruth has a kind of more open boundary where she welcomes her participants to contact her anytime. But I do believe you have certain hours, right, that you ask them to call during.
No, they sort of know my schedule and
Okay.
follow it.
Yeah. So even in that format, there are some boundaries drawn, but the idea is to know your boundary and communicate that with the person you're talking to. So your solution, Laura, is a great one.
Well, I just think the more you get to know these people and are comfortable with each other, the boundary becomes more gray. In other words, you're not afraid you're dealing with someone who's dangerous or has really severe mental problems or something that would make you feel, I mean, for me, I wouldn't feel competent to deal with a person like that. But, I think the boundaries get a little bit less specific once you know pretty well who you're dealing with. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And boundaries can be fluid, right, as things need to change. The primary thing at the end of the day is that we communicate our expectations, whatever they are. So if your boundaries with your participant change after talking to them for so many months and you're just like, you know what, let's, make it a point to schedule something once a week, but also call me if you need something. That's perfectly fine. But the real point is to say that, name it, say that's the expectation for this relationship.
Okay.
And then if something has to change, naming that, not just assuming like, well, they'll figure it out. Nope. Clearly communicating what the expectations are.
Yeah, this is Mary, and I was just gonna echo that and reinforce that and say that I think the last thing we want to do is have participants who feel like we dropped the ball, like we left them out in the cold and they don't know when to expect a call from us or if we're going to call, right? So I think, like you said, whatever you need to do so that they and you have an agreement, whatever that agreement is, it doesn't matter what it is, but whatever the agreement is, that they and you, they understand when you're going to call, or
Yes.
when they can call.
Yes. And thank you for naming that, Mary, too, because that reminds me that one of the reasons we have this recommendation is because of trauma, right? Many of our participants have been traumatized by different things, and trauma inherently takes their power away. It makes things unpredictable. And so as, mental health informed peer volunteers, we want to be very mindful that we don't re-traumatize anyone. And one of the ways we can do that is by, I always say, let them make the decision, right? Tell them what your options are and let them make the decision. Make yourself predictable. These are all trauma-informed principles for our connections.
Found with thanks for bringing that up. I found with one of the clients or peer, whatever they called it, she had different medical appointments every week and they weren't the same, and so it was very hard to be consistent. But I could, at the end of one visit, and I was doing some at home at the time, I could say, this is the time that we agreed we're going to talk or meet next week. And it was it was a structure that would seem loose, but she could remember it from week to week. But we couldn't agree on a time. It's the same time every week. We had to vary it weekly, and it worked. You know, it worked for a while. So.
Mhm. Thanks, Lois.
Mhm.
So I want to point out here, this is page 12 in the book. In this section of self-care, stay within your role as a Connections Project volunteer. We've talked about voicemails in the past, and I actually wrote out a sample voicemail structure that you can use. If you're using your Google Voice number particularly, right, you probably won't set your home phone to this, but for your Google Voice number, you can set the voicemail to a specific message for your participants. And I have a sample one written out here that includes the 211 press 1 number. So if they call you and needing to talk immediately, you're not available, you know that your voicemail has the crisis number right there for them to go to instead. And I also include the ability to chat online or text that number as well in the information to do so. So that is available in the book. If anyone wants to record a voicemail for their Google Voice number, but needs a little help figuring out how, just let me know. And I am happy to help guide you through that process. It's really quite easy. Okay. The practicing self-care section is very similar to the email that we sent out during Volunteer Appreciation Week about self-care. So I won't go through that with you now. Like I said, as we're going through this process, you'll start to see some more structure develop with the Connections Project and the timing of things. So we've figured out 4 learning seminars a year. That's enough. So that's the structure we're going to stick with. I'll send out the dates ahead of time at the, I think, beginning of every year is my goal. So you'll be able to save them in your calendars. And some of the topics will align with things throughout the year. For example, Volunteer Appreciation Month is every April. So that learning seminar will always be a self-care topic. So these are things that we're starting to figure out as we've been doing this for a while. And I'm excited to build that structure in for everyone. We included some resources on stress in here for you and mindfulness in case they can be useful in the self-care section. All right. So I want to highlight the program procedures section. This is kind of the formal communication of a lot of things that we've said verbally over the years, but now it's written down, and I'm hopeful that this will be very helpful for everyone. So the first part is on gifts, giving and receiving. So you often hear me encourage you to, do something thoughtful for your participants at a time when you think that they would really receive it, whether it's a birthday or a holiday that they recognize, or maybe they're going through a tough time. Giving gifts and little things like that is definitely something that we encourage. So with that in mind, you know that the Connections Project has limited funds to help fund these things. So you can let me know what it is you'd like to get and when, and we can plan together. And there's no obligation for a volunteer to give gifts to their participant outside of this structure, right? Of you indicating to the program, I'd like to purchase this thing. We do the purchase and, get it to them. There's no obligation for you to do more than that. If you choose to do more than that with your own funds, that is fine. But we have created guidelines that go both ways to keep the footing for participants and volunteers equal. So as a volunteer, if you choose to give your participant a gift, please keep it small, something under $10 or something homemade. Lending or gifting money is not allowed. That includes gift cards or cash. The volunteer can choose to pay for a participant's lunch or event ticket during an outing. but participants are not allowed to reciprocate. So volunteers are encouraged to use their best judgments. If your participant is able to afford the tickets on their own or lunch, then the best practice is for you each to pay your own way. Due to your role, you should not expect a reciprocal gift, right? It is not the participant's job to give us gifts. We should not expect that from them. And there's no obligation for participants to accept things that we give them, right? So please be responsive if a participant doesn't want to accept something that you've given them. And please respect that desire and take it gracefully. Any comments, questions on that? All right. So moving forward to receiving gifts from participants. As a volunteer, you're not permitted to accept cash or service gifts from your participant. That includes cash, gift cards, or the participant paying for you when you do something together, such as lunch, a ticket for an event, things like that. Should the participant choose to give you their volunteer gift, they're encouraged to keep it small as well, the same $10 limit or something homemade. And there's no obligation for participants to give gifts to volunteers. A couple times we've had participants reach out to me saying that they wanted to surprise their volunteer with something. I will not give out your mailing addresses. That is not something that is appropriate. So if that should happen, I will redirect the participant to ask you for it directly, and you can say no. You can say no. You do not need to give your mailing address to your participant. An alternative is you can invite the participant to mail an item to my office. All right, and then I can either forward it to you or you can pick it up there. Okay, so there is a middle ground with some options. Any questions, comments on that? And I will mention that one of my next projects is to write up a participant handbook, much shorter, of course, with this pertinent information. So any participants in the Connections project also have these things. It's not going to be solely up to us and us as volunteers to relay what these policies are. They'll have a copy of them to reference as well. Okay, that is in the works though, that's not ready yet. So shifting gears, let's take a look at the no answer procedure. So this is the same as it was during orientation, the whole idea of if your connection doesn't answer, leave a voicemail if possible. I included a sample recording for the voicemail if that's helpful. I know it's helpful for some folks. And letting them know the date of your next scheduled call in that voicemail. Again, managing expectations. If their voicemail box is full and you have agreed to email or text each other, you can send a message that way with the same information. And if there's no way to leave a voicemail, you can simply try calling them again on the next date you're scheduled to connect. So this is all grounded in the idea that our connections have the right to decline our calls, and we want to respect that. I also want to name that this procedure may change based on the participant's needs. For example, we have some participants that don't hear the phone ring. So their instruction is actually no, call 3 times in a row. So I have time to get to the phone once I hear it ringing. So obviously that instruction is going to change what your no answer procedure is. And then if you are unable to get a hold of your connection for 2 weeks or more, let me know. And we will work together to review the situation and decide on next steps. You're all very familiar with that as well. And a reminder that it's not our role as volunteers to call the police for a wellness check for our participants. Any questions on that? All right. So let's take a look at emergency procedures. So this is the section that Eileen referenced with the form that is going to be working its way into circulation, and like I said, my goal is the next month. So if your connection appears to be experiencing an emergency, and we'll define that a bit more in a moment, as a volunteer, you can let them know that you care about them and encourage them to connect with professional help. We can do this by utilizing the participant emergency consent form. That's the form that Eileen mentioned. And on that form, I ask participants to, let me actually pull up a copy of it so you can see it. One moment. I think that'll be more helpful for you. One moment. Participant handbook. There we go. Okay. So this is the drafted participant emergency consent form. And it basically defines what we mean by emergency, right? So we have physical emergency spelled out here to include things like being unconscious, labored breathing, bleeding, disorientation, unexplained pain, any kind of overdose, or non-health related emergencies that put them at risk, abuse, neglect, someone banging on the door threateningly, things like that. A mental health emergency is also defined here. A time of intense difficulty, trouble, or danger, aggressive or threatening behaviors, self-injurious behaviors, threatens to harm themselves or others, suicide or suicidal thoughts, an acute psychosis, which we have defined here to include delusions, hallucinations, talking incoherently, things like that. Anyone who's experiencing that typically isn't aware that they're experiencing something like that. Now, as Laura mentioned, our participants do not live in the mental health emergency space, right? These are not behaviors that we typically see our participants doing. So if they do start doing things on this list, it is likely a sign of an emergency. That being said, this form makes it a point to ask our participants if there are any emergencies that are common for them, and asks them to define what they are and how they would like you, the volunteer, to respond when they experience it. So for example, we have a participant who frequently gets lightheaded and needs to sit down or may fall down when she gets lightheaded. And, you know, she would not say that that's an emergency. When you see me do that, just guide me to a chair. I'll be fine in a couple of minutes. And that's her instruction for her volunteer. So that gives us the information to know, okay, I don't call 911 in this situation. Here's my participant's instructions. We have the same question for any mental health emergencies. And we explain what you're trained to do. Yes, Charlie.
So we get a copy of their response?
Yes.
Oh, good, okay.
Yes. So we don't have these on file for any of our participants yet. This is a new procedure. As I collect this information from your participants, I will give you a copy. And then you can keep it in your binder with the handbook, and you'll be able to pull it out if you ever need it.
Casey, I have a question. That new number, national number that's available for people who are having suicidal thoughts, that was just announced last week. Would that be appropriate to add to this if it hasn't been finalized?
I'm gonna say stick with 211 press 1 for now. There's a some kind of up in the air stuff going on with that number. So we're sticking with the 211 press 1, and then as those kinks get worked out, we'll work that into this as it's appropriate. Okay.
Well,
Great
I'm
question,
getting
Eileen.
heavy marketing about using that number from all professional venues and channels and Facebook and whatever else. I'm a little surprised we're not using it, but okay.
I've seen that marketing too, Lois. Yes. That's our position at this time, just,
Okay.
you know, based on some of the
I just
information
hope it
that we've
changes
received.
when the somebody has their ear to the ground about, yes, this is the official one, and that it gets changed in an appropriate amount of time once it's decided.
Yep.
So,
Yep. We're keeping an eye on that. All right. This form also asks the participant to verify their home address. So if you do need to request emergency services, you'll have their address right here on this form that you can reference. And they will also define their emergency contact for you as well. So you'll have that information to alert them. This form it doubles as an informational bit for you, right? For the participant to tell you what they need. And it also tells the participant what our procedures are. So it spells out who we will call in the event of any of those above emergencies. And it's identifies that we will use their emergency contact if we're unable to connect with them for several weeks, and exactly what that entails. And if they want to identify a different emergency contact for anything, they can do that too.
I have a question.
Yes.
It's not uncommon that I can't connect with Betty for several weeks. So I wouldn't want to call her emergency contact in that case, would I?
So it's dependent upon our participant situations, right? And that's part of the procedures too, is when we get to the several weeks point, connect with me. That's the first step. And then we'll talk about what's been going on, you know, and choose the next step together. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Great question. All right, so that's a sneak peek at that. And like I said, I'll let you know once we have those on file and provide you with a copy of the relevant ones for your connections. So continuing with the emergency procedures. So should the participant experience something that falls outside of the instructions that they gave you, right? Some other kind of emergency, it's our role to connect them with professional help. And so someone had referenced this earlier in their questions. We let the participant know that we're going to call emergency services on their behalf, right? We are very transparent, don't want them being surprised, let them know what's going on, that we're requesting for them to come to the person's location. If they're at home, you have their home address on that piece of paper. Confirm if they're at home. They might not be. And if they're not, we need to confirm their address before calling so we can give them the right address. If you have the technology, you can obtain your participants' consent to call emergency services while they remain on the line. And so that way they can hear everything that's going on, what's being said, contribute if they would like. Unfortunately, that's not something that Google Voice is able to do at this time. So that's something that we need to look into on our end to figure out how we can make that available to you. But if you are using your personal number and that's something that your personal line can do, that's one way to do this. If you hung up to call emergency services, please call the participant back and let them know that help is on the way. Let them know that you're hanging up for now, but we'll call back in 15 minutes to check in. That's what Mary referenced earlier. And then follow through, call back in 15 minutes to check in. Now, at that point, maybe emergency services has showed up, maybe they haven't. right? So that's a touch point to check in. Maybe the person's like, they haven't come in yet, you know, what's going on? You can comfort them and then call back again in 15 minutes. At some point, emergency services should be there, and chances are the person's not going to answer the phone while they're there. So if that happens, simply note, you know, leave a voicemail saying, this is just me checking in. I'll call you again in another 15 minutes. And continue the check-in pattern until they get to the other side of the emergency situation. There are different emergency numbers for physical emergencies and mental health emergencies. For physical emergencies, we will use 911, and we reviewed these earlier. If you suspect that your connection is experiencing an overdose from drugs or alcohol, call 911. And please use your best judgment to identify any other non-health related emergencies that may put the individual at risk for immediate harm. For mental health emergencies, we are using that 211 press 1 number. And we touched on what mental health emergencies include earlier. Please remember to let me know if you make any referrals to emergency services. Please leave me a voicemail or shoot me an email within 24 hours of the incident, letting me know what happened or what you did, or asking me to call you so we can talk about it. Okay?
Casey?
Yeah, Laura.
I'm just wondering, just say for instance, you have a person who is threatening, they're going to jump out their window. Wouldn't you call the police for that? Because don't they show up and try to talk a person down? In other words, I mean, depending on how serious, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah. And
Call the police for something like that?
so short answer is both lines are tied into the emergency response for that situation. Longer answer is 211 press 1 will send the people who are trained to respond to that situation.
I see.
911 may not.
I see. Gotcha.
So that's why I'm encouraging folks use that 211 press 1 number. It is a crisis line, right? So you can call saying so-and-so is, you know, standing on his window ledge, like he needs immediate help, please send help. They will send the Baltimore County Crisis Team who are trained in that kind of situation.
Who may or may not be the police.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Got it.
What is, I've lost the visuals, Casey, but what does 211 press 1 mean?
Yeah, great question, Lois. So 211 is the Maryland resource line.
Yeah.
When you call, you hear a prompt.
Okay, got it.
The prompt, if you press 1, it goes to crisis. Gotcha.
Okay.
Yep.
Hey, Lois, I had that problem too. I just had that problem that I couldn't see the visual. So I signed out and signed back in.
Oh, okay. I may do that. Casey's kind of coming in and out. Okay.
I just started resharing it. Can anyone else see the screen?
I could see that, but I could not see the form. You know, the emergency.
I can't see the form. I'm going to come out and again. Yeah.
Yeah. Then when I came out and came in, I could see the display again. In other words, your whole discussion, I just couldn't see it. So anyway.
Okay. All right. All right. So we'll see Lois back in a moment, but right now we are looking at, here she is. Hi again, Lois.
Hi. There you go.
So we're looking at the volunteer manual, page 20. Can you see it?
Yep.
Wonderful. All right. So the final thoughts with the emergency procedures, carry the emergency numbers so you have them, right? They're in your volunteer manual. You have a copy of this, but I encourage you put them in your phone. If, 211 press 1 is something that doesn't quite stick with you, just put it in your phone so you have it. And it is not our role to diagnose, medicate, or attempt to physically move the person if they are experiencing an emergency situation. So making that clear as well. Any questions, comments on any of that before we move on? All right. So the county, since the county is our funder, they do require us to report any critical incidents that occur with our participants. So if your connection experiences a suicide attempt, self-injury, assault or injury to others, sexual, physical abuse, neglect, or allegation of, inappropriate use of resources, incarceration, if they're incarcerated, if they accidentally overdose or die by an overdose or die of any cause, I need to submit a report to the county. Okay, so if any of this occurs while you are connected with a person through this project, please let me know within 24 hours of you becoming aware of it, okay? Well, let me know immediately so I can tell them within 24 hours. Let's go with that. All right, and lastly, reporting abuse and neglect, we're still working on this procedure. So I'm doing some research with some other peer programs to figure out exactly what this procedure is going to be. But if you have any concerns about your participants being abused or neglected, please contact me and we can talk about them, okay? All right. Any questions, comments, concerns about the emergency procedures section? It's very important that everyone understands that section, particularly since I'm going on vacation next week.
I am very happy about that reporting abuse, neglect, and that's the problem that I'm having with Marika with the county. And I've talked to you about that, and you've been somewhat helpful. Okay, and that's abuse, is that she's not getting services from the county that she needs. And I just found out earlier this week, he has been put on the a new program that's going to address some of her issues. I'm real happy. Yeah.
Good. That is wonderful news, Charlie. And I hear you in the idea that that is abusive to her because she has this need and she's being taken advantage of to some degree. And, you know, that's, I'm not sure something that is reportable in this context. But if you do feel like it's something that needs to be reported, let me know and we can investigate that together, okay?
I mean, her give you an example, her attic issue is a health issue too.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because it's spreading negative air filter stuff downstairs.
Mm-hmm.
That's one. It's not a really, you know, it is a.
Okay. Well, let's touch base about this more offline, Charlie. If
Yeah, we will.
Yeah. All right. So you all are aware that we have evaluation measures worked into the program to keep a pulse on how we're doing as volunteers and how the participants are experiencing things. So this section is just a summary of what that includes and some of the feedback that we've received too over time for you to read through there. So we have some really great evaluation feedback in there. I want to touch base on the section on ending volunteer service. So as you know, there are a couple different angles on this. One is planning for a leave of absence. Maybe you need to step away temporarily and then you plan to come back. Or maybe you're planning on resigning. Those are two kind of separate buckets that we have here. So if you need to discontinue with your connection for any reason, whether it's short-term or long-term, let me know as far in advance as possible so we can work together to support the participant in your absence. We talked about the importance of predictability earlier and open communication. So this part of it is very important that we try to manage that through this transition, whether it's temporary or the volunteer needs to step away permanently. Ideally, we want to let participants know about a volunteer's leave of absence or resignation at least 3 to 4 weeks before it takes effect. This gives the participant time to receive the news and digest it with the volunteer during their last scheduled calls, right? They get to talk to you about it and be reassured that, you know, they're not a problem, and whatever, you know, may kind of bubble up for them at that time, they get to talk to you about it, which is important. It gives you, the volunteer, an opportunity to assist the participant in creating a plan for continued support. How are they going to meet their support needs while you're away? And based on their preference, you know, that plan could include a new volunteer with a Connections project or not. But those are all important things that you'll have time to talk about. And if they do request a new volunteer, that gives us staff an opportunity and time to find someone in order to meet that need. So that being said, you know, we understand that things happen in life that may require you as a volunteer to step away, take a leave of absence from volunteering, and then come back. You are very welcome to do that. We just encourage you to communicate what you need with me, right? Keep those communication lines open so we can support you as you need and also support your volunteer so they don't feel left out in the cold, as Mary mentioned. If peer support becomes friendship, sometimes our Connections Project relationships can go so well that the relationship moves beyond that of providing peer support to genuine friendship. While it's fine to be friends with our connections while honoring our volunteer roles, program expectations, and policies, it is your responsibility as a volunteer to let staff know if the relationship is no longer able to meet these expectations. In these cases, the following things will occur. Staff will confirm that the participant is interested in continuing a relationship with you, the volunteer, outside of the Connections Project structure, right? So you will indicate to us, we're friends, I'd like to continue this outside the structure because this structure isn't something we're able to fit into anymore. So staff will reach out to the participant, confirm that on their end, and then your pairing will be removed from the Connections Project to continue informally without our supervision. The participant will be offered a new volunteer within the Connections Project, and you, the volunteer, are invited to work with a new participant. Any questions, comments on that? And the real, premise of this is that we need to make sure that our volunteer role is intact. It's fine to get close and then, be friendly with our connections, but we need to make sure that we're honoring the volunteer roles and policies and procedures. So if you feel like there's been a shift in your relationship that doesn't enable that anymore, it's your responsibility to let us know so we can do this. And you can continue on potentially with your participants on a friendly basis outside of the program. Okay. All right. Lastly here, we have a bit on termination, and there's an excerpt from the volunteer agreement that the whole thing is at the end of the manual. So when you sign the paperwork, it is in effect for 1 year from when you signed it, or until the time that the volunteer notifies MHAMD in writing that they intend to discontinue their volunteer services. As I mentioned, it was a mistake on my part that we didn't renew your paperwork annually, so that will be coming up. And if you choose that you do not want to continue volunteer service for any reason, please send it to me in writing. Email's fine. Just letting me know, and I'll put it in your file, and that can be the end of it. Or at the time of renewing the volunteer agreement, you can decline to renew it then. That's another option. Any questions, comments on that? When a volunteer leaves the Connections Project, we do have a short exit survey, just asking you some questions about your time, the reasons that you chose to leave, things like that are very helpful for our volunteer retention. All right. We talked a bit about the internship already. I include this in the handbook because, you know, the Certified Peer Recovery Specialist certification is something that is available to anyone. You don't need any special education prerequisites. It doesn't matter if you were an accountant or a secretary or a CEO previously in your life. Like, you are welcome to get this certification no matter what your life journey has been. The only crux is that you have a personal experience with mental health or addiction, and you want to support other people, which is basically what we do. So if you're enjoying this work, I include a summary of what this internship and certification are in the manual, just so you're aware that this exists. And if you are interested in pursuing it, let me know. And I am more than happy to help guide you through that process. I am a registered peer supervisor, which is a fancy way of me saying that I'm certified to do that. And the time that you spend with the Connections Project can actually count as internship hours towards that certificate. Okay. All of the requirements for that certificate are outlined in this brochure, as Laura pointed out. There is some education required to obtain the certificate, specifically about modalities and things like that. And honestly, I think a lot of it would be kind of familiar to you based on your time with our project already. The last section includes quick references. These are elements that I thought would be helpful for you to have on hand. This includes things like my contact information, the program associate that was Dina previously. I will introduce you to Chelsea soon. Also Samantha Kick from HR, who handles the paperwork, and Susan Linkus, the HR manager. Our mailing address at the office is here. As I mentioned in the gifts conversation, if your participant wants to send you a gift, you can give them our office address. The only thing is, if they address it to you, you need to let me know because our secretary will be very confused. So just give me a heads up that this is going to come, and I can let our team know to keep an eye out for it and set it on my desk when it arrives. The summary of Google Voice is available here, and a fresh write-up on what the Padlet boards are and how to access them. We simplified it a bit. If you remember, we used to have a lot more of them. So we went through, streamlined it. There's only 3 now to try to simplify things for you. There is a copy of the supervision check-in questions. So if you're someone who likes to have things in front of you, you can turn to page 31 in your handbook here. Every time we get together for supervision, you have a copy of the questions here. And then our supervision and learning seminar dates for the year. Now, I created this manual to be in a 3-ring binder, as you'll see when you receive it. And I did that on purpose so I can send you updated pages. So next year, at the beginning of the year, I will send you a new 2023 Supervision and Learning Seminar Dates page with a note to replace it. You'll just pull out the old one, put the new one in, okay? And that may show up at different points with different things. I'll make sure to give you directions as that goes. Our most frequently used resources, Maryland Access Point, 211 Maryland, Marty Logs Wellness and Recovery Center Warm Line, the Pro Bono Counseling Warm Line, and HANA Baltimore. You're all very familiar with these. This is a cheat sheet for you to keep with their contact information and a short blurb about what they do. And this is a handout that we actually created for a different training, but I think will be helpful for you all. It includes questions, conversation starters, to ask our connections about what they find meaningful. It includes questions like, what's important to you today? What brings you joy? What makes life worth living? What kinds of things make conversations easy and comfortable for you? Right? These aren't really questions we think to ask, but the answers could really be enlightening for us and give us useful information as we continue our relationship. So a copy of these questions is in the quick references section, along with instructions on how to participate in a Zoom meeting, which I think everyone here has gotten the hang of, but for our new volunteers, they may be useful. And then a copy of the orientation slides. Now, I will mention that I've updated these to include our new policies and procedures, just so they are cohesive. So if you ever want to look back and remember your orientation, there is a copy of that in here. And like I said, I wanted to give you copies of everything you've ever signed. So as we update the paperwork, I'll send you new versions to put in here, but for now, these are the versions of the onboarding paperwork that you signed when you joined the organization as a volunteer in here for your reference. This is the application, again, updated with the new criteria, the eligibility criteria, but the questions are primarily the same. The volunteer agreement that you signed. And I do want to point out that because I knew we were going to update these papers, I did not put the information in these papers anywhere in the manual. So all of the data in the onboarding paperwork is only contained in the onboarding paperwork. So this includes organizational policies, things like that. So I encourage you to just brush up on these. If you haven't yet, take a look at these just to remember what you have signed on file right now. And like I said, these will be changing in the next 2 months. We'll send out new ones for everyone. Okay. Any questions, comments on these? It also includes a summary of what you submitted for the background checks and the form that you submitted for that, and the most recent COVID precautions policy for your reference as well. And the very end, again, in that 3-ring binder format, is a space for you to tuck in anything new that we give you. So this new one that will be developed by HR about the driving participants, you can go ahead and tuck that in the back. And I included a section in the table of contents where you can write in, there's space for you to write in what you added, so you can keep track of it. And that's it.
And
Well
Casey,
done.
yeah, very, very nice overview. That policy on the transportation, will a copy of that be given to the participants like the COVID policy was?
That is a great idea, Mary.
Good idea.
Well, yeah, because then we don't, they're not going to think, well, she just don't want to drive me anywhere. So, I mean, I think it's essential that they also know what the policy is.
Thank you. That's a wonderful idea.
Okay.
I have a comment. I deal with an organization that tries to help middle school kids. And I think, Tracy, or Casey, what you should do is replicate this for school kids in Baltimore City.
The Connections Project.
Yes, and give them up seriously. I mean, I don't know. I haven't been involved. I've been involved with a lot of things, and I didn't know whether you are a mentor or a middle school kid or something like that. But boy, I'll tell you, I think this would be really very helpful.
Thank you for the
So you
suggestion,
can
Charlie.
replicate that. Yeah, I mean, the I am mentality is what I'm dealing with, and they're dealing with middle school kids, and I think I've told you that.
Mhm.
And a lot of them are students, children, that, and they're mostly Black, that, you know, don't have parents, or they only have a grandmother or whatever. And so I really think so. You know, next week, maybe you'll implement it. Okay.
Yeah, just start that. Well, Charlie, I will offer, you know, we're steeped in the older adult lens
Hmm.
with our program, but if I Am Mentality is interested in replicating this for kids, I am more than happy to meet with them and tell them about the program and give them anything that I can provide to help with that.
And maybe that's a wonderful idea. Maybe,
Yeah,
you know, they would start something like that themselves.
yeah,
Okay.
yes, I'd be more than happy to help. All right, so we are at 6 o'clock